December 1972, the B-52 Stratofortress, America's invincible nuclear bomber, was sent to crush Hanoi in Operation Linebacker II. But within 3 nights, 6 had fallen in flames, their crew trailers left empty, as no evasive action orders turned technological might into a deadly routine. How did the world's most feared bomber become prey in just days? The answer begins with the doctrine trap that no pilot dared to break. Strategic Air Command's approach to the B-52 was set long before the first bomb doors opened over Hanoi. Every aspect of the mission was ruled by doctrine developed for a different war, a different enemy, and a different kind of threat. The B-52's size, 159 feet from nose to tail and 185 feet across the wings, made it a massive target. But SAIC believed formation flying and electronic countermeasures would shield these giants from danger. The core of the plan was the 3 Scheib cell. Each bomber flew separated by 1 mile horizontally and 500 feet vertically, locked into precise intervals. This geometry was not just for show, it was the foundation of the so-called electronic countermeasures bubble. Each B-52 carried ALQ series jamming pods, emitting electronic noise designed to blind enemy radar. Alone, a single bomber's jamming could be pierced, but together, 3 overlapping fields created a zone of interference that, on paper, could cloak the entire formation from Soviet-style missile systems. SAC's manuals spelled it out. From the initial point to bombs away, no aircraft was to break formation or take evasive action. This was more than a suggestion. The order was absolute, and some commanders threatened court-martial for any deviation. The reasoning was twofold. First, formation integrity preserved the electronic countermeasures bubble. If a plane peeled off or maneuvered, it would expose itself and its wingmen to radar-guided missiles. Second, straight and level flight was considered essential for accurate bombing, especially when dropping thousands of pounds of ordnance from high altitude. The result was a rigid choreography. Each night, B-52s crossed the border into North Vietnam along the same routes, at the same altitudes, following the same timing windows. The entire attack was compressed into 15-minute periods, with bombers streaming in at 35,000 to 38,000 feet. Every crew knew the exact sequence: maintain heading, open bomb bay doors on command, release payload, then execute a post-target turn. Only after bombs were away could pilots maneuver. Until then, they flew straight into the teeth of the world's densest air defense network. On briefing room whiteboards, the electronic countermeasures bubble looked impenetrable. In reality, it was a fragile shield, one that depended on absolute discipline and unwavering trust in the system. The doctrine left no room for improvisation, no tolerance for fear or second-guessing. For the men inside the B-52s, survival hinged on faith in a playbook written for a nuclear war that never came. The true test of that faith was about to begin. December 18, 1972. The first wave of B-52s roared off runways in Guam and Thailand, lining up for the most concentrated bombing raid of the Vietnam War. On that opening night, 129 sorties streamed toward Hanoi. And Haiphong, their crews locked into rigid cells, trusting the doctrine drilled into them for years. But as the bombers crossed into North Vietnamese airspace, the sky erupted with more than 200 SA-2 guideline missiles. The ground below was ringed with the world's densest air defense network, over 1,000 missiles controlled by 30 battalions, each radar guided to hunt a target as big as a city bus. The first shock came just minutes after the bomb bay doors opened. Charcoal 1, a B-52D, took a direct hit. Inside, Staff Sergeant Samuel Turner manned the tail guns, scanning the darkness for MiG-21 fighters. As his aircraft spiraled down, Turner squeezed off a burst from his quad .50 caliber guns, catching a MiG-21 as it closed for the kill. The MiG exploded in mid-air, an unprecedented victory, the first time a B-52 tail gunner had downed a jet in combat. But there was no celebration. Charcoal One's crew bailed out into enemy territory. That night, 2 more bombers, Peach 2 and Quilt 3, were shredded by missiles. 3 B-52s lost in a single night. The next night, the pattern held. 2 more bombers failed to return. Crews watched from their cockpits as the sky lit up with missile trails and anti-aircraft fire. The inside of a B-52 glowed white from the flak bursts, bright enough for some to read their checklists by the light. Orders remained. No one was to break formation, no matter how many radar locks screamed across the threat receivers. December 20th, 1972. Night 3. The losses spiked to a level no one in Strategic Air Command had ever seen. 6 B-52s were shot down in a single night, nearly 7% of the attacking force. North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile crews had learned the American playbook. They waited for the moment the bomb bay doors opened, when the radar cross-section of each bomber doubled, then launched in salvos. They targeted the lead aircraft in each cell, knowing that a single kill could collapse the entire electronic jamming shield. In the aftermath, the toll was impossible to ignore. 11 bombers lost in 3 nights. Dozens of airmen killed, missing, or captured. On the ground in Guam and Thailand, the empty trailers told their own story, crews who had not come back, and beds that would stay unmade. The air war had become a test of faith in doctrine, and the price was being paid in blood and metal. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was measured in sorties that never landed, and in the names that vanished from the flight rosters overnight. General John C. Meyer sat in his command post, phone lines buzzing with updates from Guam and Utapao. The numbers were grim. 9 B-52s lost in just 3 nights, each one an $8 million asset, each carrying a crew of 6. There was no backup plan, no reserve fleet waiting in the wings. The B-52 production line had been shut down a decade earlier. Every bomber shot down was gone for good. The casualty list grew by the hour. 54 airmen killed, missing, or captured. Meyer's staff tracked each call sign that failed to check in, each trailer left empty on base. The losses were not just statistics. They were faces, voices, families waiting for news. In the war rooms, the tension was palpable. Staff officers pored over mission logs and after-action reports, searching for answers. The doctrine had promised protection, but the reality was undeniable. The enemy had adapted, and the cost was climbing with every sortie. Behind closed doors, Meyer faced a dilemma. The mission was to break North Vietnam's will, to force them back to the negotiating table. But the price was bordering on unsustainable. He knew the numbers by heart. 9 bombers lost meant more than $70 million in hardware erased in less than 72 hours. And more importantly, 54 crew members who would not be flying another mission. The phone logs from Strategic Air Command headquarters captured the pressure. Every wing commander wanted answers, every squadron leader demanded a change. Meyer's aides argued for a pause, for a tactical rethink. Others insisted the campaign had to continue at full intensity. Intelligence analysts pointed to signs that the North Vietnamese surface-to-air missile stockpile was running low. But the evidence was thin, and the stakes were absolute. If the losses continued at this rate, the entire strategic bomber force could be crippled. There was no way to replace the aircraft or the men. Each decision weighed the fate of the mission against the irreplaceable cost of another downed crew. "There is no B-52 production line," he told his staff. We cannot afford to lose many more. But the order stood. Press on. The hope was that the enemy's missile reserves would run dry before the bomber force did. In the background, the pressure to succeed came from the highest levels. The White House wanted results, not excuses. As the fourth night approached, the sense of crisis reached its peak. The old playbook had failed, and everyone in the command chain knew it. Meyer's final instruction was clear. The tactics would be rewritten. The survival of the B-52 force and the outcome of the entire operation now depended on a willingness to break with the past. The fourth night brought a different war. Gone were the straight, predictable streams of bombers. Mission planners at Anderson and U-Tapao tore up the old playbook, replacing it with a patchwork of new tactics. B-52s now crossed into North Vietnam from multiple directions, some from the Gulf of Tonkin, others looping in from Laos. Altitudes shifted from cell to cell, and the timing of each wave was staggered over hours, not compressed into a single deadly window. The enemy radar screens, once filled with neat lines of targets, now showed confusion. Chaff became the first line of defense. F-4 Phantoms flew ahead of the bombers, dropping thousands of thin aluminum strips. These created shimmering corridors on North Vietnamese radar, masking the true course of the bombers and forcing SAM operators to guess. At the same time, F-105 Wild Weasels hunted the missile sites themselves, firing anti-radiation missiles at any radar that dared light up. The days of the B-52s flying alone were over. Inside the cockpits, crews finally received the order they had been waiting for. After bomb release, they could jink, making sharp, unpredictable turns that threw off missile tracking. It was not perfect protection, but it broke the spell of predictability. The effect was immediate. From December 22nd to December 26th, 380 B-52 sorties thundered over Hanoi and Haiphong. Only 2 bombers were lost, even as North Vietnamese gunners fired another 880 SA-2 missiles. The kill rate for those missiles plummeted, dropping below 1%. For the first time, crews felt the odds shift in their favor. December 24th brought a rare moment of triumph. Over the darkness of North Vietnam, tail gunner Albert Moore spotted a MiG-21 closing in on his formation. He waited until the fighter was nearly on top of them, then unleashed a burst from his quad 50 caliber guns. The MiG disintegrated mid-air, only the second time in history a B-52 tail gunner scored an air-to-air kill. Moore's calm under fire became legend among the crews, proof that survival sometimes depended on a single man's nerve. The new tactics reached their peak on December 26th. That night, the largest raid of the campaign launched. 120 B-52s in 7 waves, hitting 10 separate targets. The sky above Hanoi became a maze of decoys, chaff clouds, and jamming signals. North Vietnamese missile crews fired everything they had. By the end of the night, their stockpiles were nearly empty. Yet the bombers pressed on, dropping more than 20,000 bombs in a single night. The cost that night was not a single B-52 lost over Hanoi. By December 27th, the enemy missile batteries were running on fumes. One final B-52 fell over Tai Nguyen, but the pattern was clear. The dense SAM network that had once seemed impenetrable was now spent. The bombers, battered but unbroken, had found a way through. January 27th, 1973. The Paris Peace Accords bore the signatures of men who had watched the skies over Hanoi burn. The cost of that agreement was tallied not just in bombs dropped, 15,000 tons in 11 days, but in the silent roll call of missing B-52 aircraft and the crews who never returned. 15 bombers destroyed, 92 airmen lost to death, capture, or disappearance. Each loss was more than a statistic. It emptied a living space, ended a string of letters home, left a gap in a squadron's formation. In the months that followed, the consequences of Linebacker II echoed through every military channel. By March, 591 American prisoners of war walked out of North Vietnamese camps, including 33 B-52 crew members shot down during those December nights. Their release was the most visible proof that the bombing had forced a diplomatic break in the deadlock. The Nixon administration declared peace with honor, pointing to the return of the prisoners of war as evidence that the sacrifice had achieved its aim. But the price was steep. North Vietnam's willingness to negotiate came at the cost of irreplaceable bombers and the irreplaceable people inside them. For every prisoner of war who stepped off a transport plane, there were families still waiting, and names that would never be called at roll. The ledger of Operation Linebacker II was written in both the language of strategy and the language of loss, a calculation that haunted commanders and crews alike. The campaign's outcome would shape not only the end of the war, but the future of American air power itself. After the last bombs fell in December 1972, the lessons of Linebacker II forced a complete rethinking of how the B-52 would fight and survive. The old doctrine, built for high-altitude nuclear runs, was abandoned, and in its place came a new playbook that traded predictability for adaptability. By 1975, Strategic Air Command manuals called for low-level penetration tactics. Crews trained to fly just 500 feet above the ground, using terrain following radar to slip beneath radar coverage and avoid the engagement zones of surface-to-air missiles. The B-52, once a symbol of brute force, now relied on stealth, deception, and speed. The evolution did not stop at tactics. Engineers set to work on new systems to keep the bomber relevant. The introduction of the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile turned the B-52 into a standoff platform, able to strike from hundreds of miles outside enemy defenses. Modernization programs brought upgraded avionics, digital navigation, and precision-guided weapons. Even the engines, some dating back to the early 1960s, are now slated for replacement, promising greater range and reliability well into the 2050s. Today, 76 B-52H models remain active, all built during the Kennedy administration. These aircraft have outlasted the Cold War, survived the drawdown after Vietnam, and flown in every major conflict since. The same airframe that braved Hanoi's defenses now carries smart weapons over Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond. What began as a lesson in vulnerability became a blueprint for adaptation. The B-52's endurance is not an accident. It is the direct result of learning, sometimes painfully, from the failures of the past. 76 B-52s still stand alert, decades after Hanoi's searchlights first exposed their vulnerability. Today, these bombers fly with new tactics and weapons, yet their survival depends on lessons written in fire over North Vietnam. As modern air defenses evolve, the cost of ignoring history grows steeper. In war, adaptation isn't a choice. It's the only way home. What would you risk for a lesson learned too late?